I turned 1, 2. Don't ask me to count any higher. Just go to 2. One, 2, 2, 1. Alpha, Z. Well, go ring the bell. Get them, chase them out of there. Ding, ding. Ding, 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 ding. Well, good morning. I have a bell. I have one. Susan hates it. The bell I have when I ring it out of the kitchen. I'll give them a minute to matriculate in. Last week, it was hot. Hot and humid. I went over to Tampa. Oh. Good. We'll go ahead and get started. We're in Nehemiah 4, and this is where they're getting a lot of pressure to stop again. Big surprise, right? And that's been all the way through Ezra, and now they're doing it in Nehemiah. What were they trying to get him to stop doing in Ezra? Huh? Not in Ezra. What were they trying to get him to stop rebuilding in Ezra? Temple. Okay. And in Nehemiah, it's the wall. Okay. When Darius put out one, and Cyrus put out one. When they put out their decrees to go rebuild, what was it for? Do you remember? And Artaxerxes. Was it the temple and the wall? Or was it just the temple? It was just the temple. Never was the wall. All the stuff that he sent down there was for rebuilding the temple. Okay. So Nehemiah has a little bit of a different mandate. Nehemiah went down there and he had money and he had access to the king's forests, and all the blocks they needed were still there. They were scattered all over the place. But he didn't have anything that he brought with him that said, and if anybody interferes with what you're doing, they're in trouble. Remember when Artaxerxes sent Ezra there to rebuild the temple? He said, if anybody interferes with it, I'm going to step in. This is a problem. But for the wall, if you go back and look in the beginning of Nehemiah, Artaxerxes does send him back to build the wall. But he doesn't have a decree that we know of that says, and if anybody interferes, we're going to kill him. So it's a little bit different situation. That's kind of a little preview on bringing into this chapter 4. Chapter 4 is everybody unites to try and get them to stop building the wall. That's the whole point of chapter 4. So let's go through that. That's interesting. Now it came about when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became furious, very angry, and mocked the Jews. He spoke in the presence of his brothers and the wealthy men of Samaria and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Are they going to destroy it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish in a day? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones?" So, who's Sanballat? And is he one of the Jews? No, she says no. What region is Sanballat in? It's there. Samaria. Yeah, he's in Samaria. Could he be a Jew? Possibly. But they weren't adhering much to the law of Moses. Matter of fact, the only ones that kept the law of Moses were the ones that went into captivity. Remember, the Sumerians were settled by the Syrians, where they went and they took the northern part, Israel. They took it in total captivity and resettled it with their own people. So it was a mixture. So they had paganism mixed with maybe some Judaism in that particular area. So why would he become furious over the rebuilding of the wall? He's not a little bit put out. He's furious. What would the wall prevent him being able to do? I've only got 15 slides, so I can wait. Well, yeah, he's got open access to all these people that came down with lots of money to go spend, and he's got open access. It also is a barrier to power, okay? He's got power, okay? He can walk in there anytime. He's probably got somewhat of an army of some sort. What is he criticizing? What kind of criticism is this?
He's supposed to be helping them. Can you restore it for yourselves? It's like he wants credit for it or something.
Well, yeah, he says, he's got 4 questions in here. But he's got his, as they say now, some used to say, he's got his posse, right? He's got all the wealthy guys with him and the nobles in Samaria. And he's sitting there and says, can they do this? No. Can they do this? No. Can they offer sacrifices? Can they restore it for themselves? No, they can't do that. What are they? They're feeble, They don't know how to do anything. They're a bunch of idiots, So he's just criticizing, just trying to tear them down, just trying to demoralize. What makes no sense? One of them makes no sense to me when I looked at it.
By themselves, right off the bat, they're never going to do it by themselves because God's got to help them.
Yeah, of course, they may not recognize God.
But he doesn't realize that because he's a fake.
He's not a man of faith. That's true. The one that I picked on was, can they offer sacrifices? What's been rebuilt? The temple. They are offering sacrifices. They've been offering sacrifices. They just don't have a wall, but they have a temple. Temple's about 90 feet long, about 90 feet high. I don't know how wide it is, probably about 45 feet wide. But it's a huge temple. They've been offering sacrifices. They've got the Levites and the priests and everybody else that's all there in the temple. They have worship going on. So he's just kind of babbling, just kind of throwing stuff out. Now, Tobiah, the Ammonite, it's good that I don't have a lot of names in this one. Maybe you'll get that one next week. Now, Tobiah, the Ammonite, was near him, and he said, even what they are building, if a fox should jump on it, he would break down their stone wall down. So he's got some criticism that's the same kind, isn't it? Is any of this rooted in reality? No. This is all just, hey, maybe we could just criticize it and everything like that. We'll just make fun of it and everything like that. We're not sure they can follow through. But who are the Ammonites? I'm waiting for somebody to give me the classic answer to say they're from Ammon. Anybody got any idea?
That'd be an enemy.
They're kind of an enemy?
Yeah. I recognize.
Were they one of the people that God said, take the land, destroy it, it's part of what I'm giving to you? Or are they outside of the area where God said, take the land, destroy the people? You're on the outside. She's right. They're on the outside. They're across the Jordan. They're east of where Judah is where Ammon is. And below Ammon is Moab, if you've got a map in your head on the area. Back in Deuteronomy, when they were coming out, Moses wrote, when you come opposite the sons of Ammon, do not harass them nor provoke them. For I will not give you any of the land of the sons of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the sons of Lot as a possession. So, Ammon was never meant to be displaced, okay? But again, it's east of the Jordan. It was an area they didn't really even go through when they entered into the Promised Land. They went a little bit south of Ammon. I believe it was south or north. But they did not go through Ammon. So that's who the Ammonites are. So, and his disparage, is there any validity to what he's saying? What's the wall? What do they build the wall with? Huge stones. Not pebbles piled on top of each other, huge stones. And when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the walls, he left it where one stone wasn't on top of another stone. But what did he do with the stones? He didn't cart them off anywhere. He just left them all over the place on the ground. So this is a matter of just what stones you can use that haven't been cracked or whatever, moving them and getting them stacked back onto the wall. So again, it's more criticism that has no foundation, pun intended. Hear, O God, how we are despised. Return their reproach on their own heads and give them up for plunder in a land of captivity. Do not forgive their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out before you, for they have demoralized the builders. So this wasn't a one-time statement. This was something they just kept chattering all the time. All the people were just, you guys, you can't do this, you can't. So they demoralized the builders. So what did the Jews pray for with regards to their enemies?
Dose of their own medicine.
A little dose of their own medicine? Return their reproach on their heads, which is what you're saying? Give them up for plunder in captivity? Kind of experience what we experienced when Nebuchadnezzar took us to Babylon. They had a what analogy? Oh, okay. What's their sin?
Demoralize the builders.
Yeah. Interfering with God's plan, which was rebuilding the wall. I don't think it was happenstance that the relatives of Nehemiah came back from Jerusalem and met with Nehemiah while he was in Susa and said, and Nehemiah says, how are things in Jerusalem? And they said, well, the temple's been rebuilt, blah, 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 but the walls are still down. And Nehemiah went into a funk. You know, he felt horrible about it. Okay, how do you reconcile with this out of Matthew, what they prayed for? You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you are to be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. What's Christ saying?
Well, even though it hurts, you still got to pray for them, that they change, because God loves everybody.
Yeah.
And that's probably the hardest thing right there to do.
That's hard. That's hard to pray for your enemies. What was the point that Christ is getting towards? What's part of the reason you're praying for your enemies? Where are you trying to bring them?
Well, it's saying the same thing as Christ is even dying for the enemy.
Well, yeah. When he died, what was our relationship with him?
We're enemies.
We were enemies, right. What's the point of praying for your enemies with Christ, what he's saying here? Isn't that to try and bring those enemies to Christ? Eventually to touch their heart? What's the situation, though, with rebuilding the walls in Babylon? Jerusalem. I'm sorry, not Babylon. Are they trying to bring any of those people to Judaism? No, they're not. It's a different situation. But again, it's a situation where you need to be mindful. Everything that's done, which is what's great about the Bible, is recorded. And it would look like to this, there's an obvious conflict. But with Christ, it was like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That was Old Testament law, wasn't it? Christ is saying, no, we're going to look at things differently now, okay? Because now it's not God's chosen people who are the Jews only. Now it's the world. I want to bring peace to the entire world. Those that were enemies, I want to make brothers and sisters. So it's a different focus in what's going on, but you can kind of see where you can get sidetracked with something like this, is to say, I need to understand the situation that's being applied here. They did pray for him, but they prayed for him to be destroyed. Or at least they prayed for them to say, you need to experience what we experienced, which is what they went through. But it is a different situation, isn't it? Because the Jews were chosen. What were the Jews chosen for? God chose the Jews. Not because of anything they did, but he chose them. Why? To bring the Christ. That's what he chose them for. He didn't choose them to be his people forever. He chose them to bring the Christ, to bring the Savior. So back to Nehemiah. So we built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height. For the people had a mind to work. Now then, Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites heard that the repair of the walls of Jerusalem went on, and that the breaches began to be closed. They were very angry. All of them conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem and cause a disturbance in it. So they went from just heckling to the next phase. What angered them?
Something done.
Yeah, you got some traction. Okay, the wall's halfway up. Now, I'm not sure how high the walls are, but I got a feeling they were about 18 feet. So they're about 9 feet up. So they're already a barrier, and they got the wall parts. They got probably some of the gates rebuilt, the structure around the gates, and the breaches. Now, the breaches were the holes in the areas of the wall that didn't have any blocks at all. So now the breaches are so now they're getting secure. Now they can keep working. What angered them was, I didn't have ready access. My control's going away. I could just walk in there anytime I wanted.
It's like when Israel builds something today to protect themselves, they get the same response.
Oh, they get heckled by the world.
By basically the same people.
Yeah. Well, actually, sometimes depending on who administration is in there, our administration joins in too. So how did their strategy evolve? It went from heckling to what?
And throw a wrench in the works.
Now we've got to fight. Now we've got to go attack. Okay? Their intent, they were intent on stopping the wall. They were intent because it interfered with their plans on how they wanted to control Jerusalem. Horonites. The Horonites and the Ammonites were not two of the peoples God had driven from the Promised Land for the Israelites. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Gershom. Gershom was for the Arabs. Were regional governors serving under the king of Persia. So that's, you see those names, you go, I don't know who those people are. So I did some research on those. Horon, or Horonite, is located in Moab. So you've got Ammon, and right below Ammon, you've got Moab. So those are the two areas. And Sanballat, if you remember, is a Horonite. So he's from Moab, but he's in Samaria. And he's a governor, a territorial governor, appointed by the king of Persia in Samaria. So that's who he is. Tobiah is an Ammonite, so he's off to the east. And Gershom is of the Arabs, and they're to the south. Sanballat, he could have been from Horonarium. That's in Moab, as I said, but if you look at the verses in there, he was governing in the lower and the upper Beth Horon in the Sumerian border of Benjamin. So you remember, you have Judah, and just the sliver above Judah is Benjamin. Benjamin was a very small tribe. And just north of there is where they think his seat of government was in Samaria for Sanballat. Let's see. The last one, Sanballat's life. Is this his grandson? Yeah, his grandson was married to one of the daughters of the high priest in Jerusalem. And as a result of that, Nehemiah basically fired him, because there was an alliance there between a pagan and the daughter of a high priest. And he said, you shouldn't have let that happen. Tobiah was the one in Ammon. He was the Ammonite. That's kind of his temple and his palace. What do you notice about what it's got around it? A great big wall. Give you an idea of the wall size? There's a guy sitting down here, right here at the base of the wall. If he's about 6 feet, that means the top of that wall is about 18 feet. Pretty tall wall. So the Ammonite, he was governing the area east of the Jordan. Gershom was in the south. I couldn't find anything for Sanballat and for Gershom. Gershom was over the Arabs. The Arabs tended to be a migrating group, so they may not have had a palace. But I'll bet you, I couldn't find anything, but I suspect Sanballat had a palace and probably had a wall around it. So this is what it looked like. Sanballat is to the north in the red in this region. Tobiah is over here. This is Moab. And this is the Arabian area that's under Gershom. So that's these three people who are working together to apply pressure on Jerusalem. It's not even really Judah, is it? It's Jerusalem. It's just one small little area. But you've got thousands of Jews that have come back in this small little area with money, and they're very productive as far as growing crops and things like that. And they want to have the control. All three of them want to have that control. So they're surrounded on all sides because you've got the Med off to the west. So that's the situation that they're looking at and continuing to build. These are established, territorial governors. And they must have some sort of a militia associated with them. Now, what training would the Jews have had that had come back from Babylon as far as fighting? None. None, okay? So you have 3 potential armies, militia, whatever you want to call them, that the territorial governors have access to, that they can go in. So they're a pretty big threat, right? If you look at it just between people to people. What they don't recognize is it's people to God. So, give you any of that perspective on what's going on in Nehemiah 4. But we prayed to our God, and because of them, we set up a guard against them day and night. Thus, in Judah it was said, the strength of the burden bearers is failing, yet there is much rubbish, and we ourselves are unable to rebuild the wall. So what did they do in response to the threat? They had guards night and day. What else? But we prayed. First thing they did. Then they put guards in there. So they prayed to God to help them, but they didn't say, well, God, it's all up to you. They went ahead and put guards up. Now, how effective would these guards have been against an army? None. They'd have just overrun them. So you can see God's already there. They're doing things that they need to do. But you can see God's already intervening. What internal factor was impeding the work on rebuilding the wall? Well, they couldn't rebuild the wall. But what was it? They had something internally that was impeding them. What was that? Rubbish, yeah. It was what would that rubbish be? If you had an 18-foot wall, this is, 20-something feet here, I believe. And they knocked the wall down. Where'd all the blocks go? All over the place. They had, if you've ever done work, I know Mickey's built a couple houses and stuff like that. If you've got stuff all over the place that you're tripping over, how much are you going to get done? Huh? You need good boots. You need to clean up. I've been to some of these home building sites, and they're very clean recently, some of them. But if you've got stuff all over the place, you can't get much done because you're tripping over stuff all the time. And that was part of the problem they had internally was all that rubbish, all the parts of the wall that were stones that were broken up in pieces that they couldn't use to rebuild the wall, they were all in the way. So they had stuff in the way.
When it's been sitting there for 100 years, you got grass and trees growing up through it.
Yep.
You got all the trash from town. They had the dung gate. I'm sure it was as simple just to pour it on top of the rocks as it was to carry it out all the way. So, yeah, a lot of junk to clear out.
There's a lot of junk to clear out, and we have a kind of a perspective, and I'm glad you brought that up, Doug, of what the Holy Land was like and what it's like today. But what it was like then was very fertile. You see pictures of Israel and things like that right now. What does it look like? It's very arid, isn't it? It's dry, sparse. Back then, nah. Remember when they first went into Canaan? They couldn't hardly carry the grapes on the stalks they were on because they were so plentiful. It was a land flowing with milk and honey. So, with what he says, with their undergrowth all over these rocks and everything else like that, where they had to dig all this stuff out and clear out all the brush that was around it, and trees that may have grown up around it and everything like that they had to work, yeah, it was a mess. They had a lot of stuff in the way. Our enemy said, they will not know or see until we come among them, kill them, and put a stop to this work. When the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times, they will come up against us from every place where you may turn. Then I stationed men in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, the exposed places, and I stationed the people in families with their swords, spears, and bows. So what did the enemies decide to do?
surprise attack.
Surprise them and kill them, right? Surprise attack, hit them where they're weak. Remember, this wall it isn't a small wall. I don't know how many miles it is. Doug, do you remember how many miles, by any chance, the Jerusalem wall was? It's
From the microphone. One of the sections they rebuilt in chapter 3, they talked about being 1,000 cubits, so 1,500 feet. Yeah, I'm going to say, I don't know, yeah, less than 10 miles though.
Yeah, it's probably close to about 5 miles to go around this. So you're going to have a lot of breaches, right? Did they have a lot of people there? I mean, they had a few thousand people there, but if you're looking at an army coming in and you've got 5 miles of wall and it isn't all rebuilt, that's going to be kind of hard to cover, isn't it? There's something that stood out in this particular verses. How did Nehemiah respond to the charge, to those in charge, with the news? One of the things you got to look at is there was a certain group, there was a certain percentage of the people that lived within where the walls were going to go in Jerusalem. But there was a large percentage of the people, maybe 50%, that lived outside of Jerusalem, that were working the land. And what he did was he pulled people in from outside, inside. So everybody was inside. Everybody was involved in rebuilding the wall or protecting those who were rebuilding the wall. Oops. There's something else that jumped out at me on this one. How many times did they have to hear that they're going to come and kill you before you did something? 10 times. So they were a little bit tone deaf. They really weren't listening, or they didn't believe it. But when they started hearing the story coming back, they're coming, they're going to kill us all. He finally did something. When I saw their fear, I rose and spoke to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for you, brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. So, you can imagine that if Nehemiah is hearing this, everybody who's building the wall is hearing the same thing too. The guys that are north of us, east of us, south of us, are all going to come and kill us. They're not warriors. They're not soldiers. So Nehemiah has to kind of settle people down to say, you got to look at it from the right perspective. It's not just you. It's God who's going to protect us. Okay, there's things that we're going to do, but God is the one who's really, really in charge. You need to depend on Him. What does this provide God? What do the Ammonites and the Arabs and the Samaritans provide God an opportunity to do? Show He's God. So how are the Jews responding to the rebuilding, to the threats?
It's predictable.
It's predictable. They're about ready to run away.
They would respond the same way.
Yeah. I mean, this was a stepped-up approach. First it was ridicule and heckle. The next one was threaten. And the next one is to make the threat more realistic. We're going to come. We're going to hit you where you're weak. We're going to come in. We're going to kill you. So what did Nehemiah do? How did he bolster their spirits?
Give them a pep talk.
Yeah. He said, you're not looking at this wrong. You're not looking at this that God is the one who's in charge. And He's going to do it in a way maybe you wouldn't expect, which is what's in the next verses. When enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated the plan, then all of us returned to the wall, each one to his work. From that day on, half of my servants carried the work, while half of them held spears, the shields, the bows, and the breastplates, and the captains were behind the whole house of Judah. So, how did they respond to what Nehemiah did and what God did. Do we know how God frustrated their plan? We don't know.
They gave up their plans.
Yeah, their plan to invade
Yeah,
and kill everybody,
Something scary.
we're not going to do that. Does their response make sense? You have a situation, like I said, where God took them that were of small faith and strengthened their faith because he protected them. Because they really couldn't protect themselves. I mean, they got spears, they got some swords. I don't know whether they had a sword and they shared it amongst a couple guys, and they had, 50 or 100 swords. But swords they weren't plentiful. Spears, yeah, you could go sharpen something and have a spear. But to have those things that you needed to fight war and everything like that, they weren't plentiful. Okay, they were expensive, they were hard to come by. So how did that threat and overcoming the threat affect building the wall? Yeah, at least in half, because some guys were standing there watching guard while the other guys were moving stones around and lugging things around and rebuilding the gates that were made out of wood. So, we watched a show called Barnwood Builders. Well, they had to take those trees and hew them. In other words, you're going to have to take an axe and you're going to have to cut it so you square it up. And that ain't easy. That takes a lot of work to square up a log and get it where you can use it to make a gate. Those who were rebuilding the wall and those who carried the burdens took their load with one hand doing the work and the other holding a weapon. So I got a spear and I'm going to be lugging something along with my other hand that the builders need. As for the builders, each wore a sword girded at his side as he built, while the trumpeter stood near me. I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is great and extensive, and we are separated from the wall, far from one another. At whatever place you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So, again, they aren't experienced soldiers, but they do have a plan. But that plan includes God. The attitude changed. Okay? Those who were wielding a weapon, what else did they have to do? They still had to move stuff around with their free hand. So they were dispersed. Remember, we said the wall may have been like 5 miles and people working on different sections of it. How'd that impact the security and how did they overcome that? Huh? Yeah. They were far. There was a group working here, and you went another 1,500 feet. There was a group working here, and another 1,500 feet. There was a group working here. So they had somebody with a trumpet. So, because if you're going to attack, are you going to attack where they're strongest or weakest? Weakest, right? Once you penetrate the defense, then you're working behind the lines and you can be very effective. So with the trumpet and with God fighting for them, because they weren't very good fighters, they could rebuild the wall. Now, nobody attacked. The reason they didn't attack is because God intervened. It's not because they were so strong, because they weren't. So last verses. So we carried on the work with half of them holding spears from dawn until the stars appeared. At that time, I also said to the people, let each man with his servant spend the night within Jerusalem. Remember, I said a large percentage of them lived outside of Jerusalem. Within Jerusalem, so that they may guard for us by night and labor by day. So neither I, my brothers, my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us removed our clothes. Each took his weapon, even to the water. So, as I said, they didn't all live inside the walls, but when they were doing this, they brought the people in. so they could protect themselves and protect the wall. So how extreme was that threat? Pretty high, okay? Because even when they went for water, they carried the sword with them. And they never, I guess they never changed clothes. That may be another thing God did, was they kept their clothes where they were still working. But they stayed ready at all the time to fight. If you woke up in the middle of the night, you were supposed to be ready to fight. So that's kind of the state they were living in until they got the wall rebuilt, that they had some security. Questions? They rebuilt the wall in record time. We'll talk about what that is in later chapters, but where the temple took a long, long time, they kept building the walls. Thanks for your attention.
Sing the wondrous